So my name is Olivia Rice with RTI, the Research Triangle Institute, and I am so excited to be here today with us. The session we're about to start, strengthening the pipeline through paid teacher apprenticeships, is really near and dear to me. It kind of brings together two worlds that I work in, and so over the years we've been partnering with Best in C at these innovation labs and exploring strategies to address challenges within the teaching profession. And then in my sort of daily job work as a research analyst at RTI, I work on workforce development strategies, including apprenticeships. And today we've got representatives here to talk about both of these strategies, and so I'm just really looking forward to talking. But before we jump into the discussion, I did want to do a little bit of framing on why we're talking about apprenticeships to begin with. So we know under the current structure, people that enroll in traditional educator prep programs traditionally do student teaching at least for one semester during their program. And we also know that over 80% of part-time college students and nearly half of full-time college students rely on paid job experiences throughout their college program. So during student teaching experiences, these student teachers typically go unpaid, and due to program commitments are often unable to work an additional job. This kind of creates financial barriers to completing the education preparation program and may even deter students from entering an educator prep program. We also know that student teaching experiences are not necessarily consistent, and sometimes the quality may vary. Meanwhile, we have candidates that go through North Carolina's growing residency program, licensure pathway, that are not required to receive any classroom training prior to becoming the paid teacher of record. This results in them being unprepared for the demands of being a teacher and overwhelmed as they juggle their education coursework and their on-the-job preparation experiences. So, if we're going to improve teacher recruitment, it's time to re-envision how we can best prepare and support beginning teachers through these critical on-the-job experiences. Establishing a paid teacher apprenticeship program was one of the 5 key priorities identified by the NC STRIDE working group. And specifically, you can find the recommended actions under the exposure category or strategies 4B and 4C of the NC STRIDE action plan. Okay, so time for a quick poll. How much do you currently know about the registered apprenticeship system? I'll give you guys a second to respond to that. All right. So we're going to use that information, and that'll be helpful to kind of understand how much, kind of awareness we need to raise around apprenticeship programs. When we think of apprenticeship programs in the workforce development area, we often think about it as the premier work-based learning program with very specific aspects. And in doing some initial research for this session, we found that there are programs popping up across the country that are seeking to solve some of our same challenges. These are programs including Texas, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Kansas, New York, and Tennessee. Not all of them are currently using the term apprenticeship, and none of them are currently registered or recognized by the U.S. Department of Labor as an official registered apprenticeship program. So North Carolina really could lead the way in this approach. And today we have 2 great panelists that will bring us some unique insights into what a teacher apprenticeship program could look like here in North Carolina. Our first panelist, Stephanie Dean, is the Senior Vice President for Opportunity Culture, Policy, and Outreach at Public Impact, and she'll help provide insights into innovative strategies that Texas is currently using to provide high-quality school-based training for future teachers. And our second panelist, Kathryn Castelloes, is North Carolina's Registered Apprenticeship Director, and she'll provide insights into the Registered Apprenticeship System and the potential benefits of formalizing a teacher training model into a registered apprenticeship program. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Dean and invite you to tell us a little bit about what's going on in Texas and talk to us about the driving force behind it.
So the work that Public Impact's been doing in Texas is going to sound familiar to you because it's very similar to the work we've been doing in North Carolina with some of your advanced teaching role sites for years. So we have 11 districts now in Texas that are designing and implementing opportunity culture models with multi-classroom leaders leading small teams of teachers. As you heard mentioned in the Teach and See highlight, the teacher who was highlighted talked about that Reach Associate role that she served in during her apprenticeship year. That's essentially the model that we're building in Texas with these districts. So instead of having opportunity culture design in place and recognizing this Reach Associate paraprofessional role could be redesigned as an apprenticeship for a teacher in training, they're designing the opportunity culture structure with that baked in from the start. So working with their ed prep providers to envision what that full year clinical placement would look like. These are ed prep providers who had already made the commitment to changing their program to end in a fourth year that would be a full year clinical placement, which required some adjustment to their schedules and credit, the way they were awarding credits. And so they had made the commitment on the ed prep provider side. The districts were interested in making this part of their recruitment pipeline. And so we've been working with those districts to design opportunity culture models with the apprenticeship as a part of that. I think some of the motivation for the districts why they would want to do this work is similar to the motivation for districts in North Carolina that have wanted to develop advanced teaching roles. They're thinking of their pipeline, as Tom Talk was mentioning, they're thinking of the whole pipeline and recruitment as being a part of that entire pipeline. They're recognizing that they have dramatic teacher vacancies. Our first pair of districts in Texas had hundreds of vacancies every year that they were trying to fill. And these are districts of the size of about 40 schools to give you a sense of the scale of vacancies that they were fighting against each year. They have a dramatic need to improve student learning for students, particularly students who have not been served well by our system. So we know vacancies disproportionately affect students. It's not the same across the board. Feeling a lot of weight on the shoulders of their principals and recognizing they have a lot of principal turnover because it's hard to be the instructional leader of a school. It's hard to play that role that burns people out very quickly. How can you help them develop those instructional leadership teams? And wanting to create that culture of support for all teachers in the school. And so thinking of apprenticeship as a piece of that puzzle. So instead of thinking of apprenticeship as something that would be added on to just the regular traditional structure, thinking of rethink the structure while you work in the apprenticeship and make the apprenticeship a critical part of that new way of doing business in the school. So that's kind of the setup in Texas.
Great, thank you. And that sounds very interesting. I'm looking forward to getting more details about the program as we go on. But I'd like to bring Kathryn into this discussion. And it's funny, as Stephanie talked, it kind of reminded me of the first time I ever talked to Kathryn, which was many years ago. But I was working on a project that was connecting career and technical education to the registered apprenticeship system. And I asked Kathryn, I wasn't familiar with apprenticeship, and to tell me a little bit about it. And it's funny because the analogy she used then was, well, an apprenticeship is actually like a lot of other job training programs. Doctors have residencies. Teachers have student teaching, and it's really about getting that on-the-job training. And so it occurs to me it's ironic that here we are all these years later talking about potentially changing a student teaching model into a more formalized apprenticeship model. So with that, could you maybe just start by providing a brief kind of context for the apprenticeship system and tell us why you think teaching might be a good candidate for an apprenticeship program?
Thank you, Olivia. Yeah, she's telling on me how old I am here. But at any rate, yes, here in the United States, we fall under the U.S. Department of Labor. Registered apprenticeship is under their guidance, which is under the Education and Training Administration, which falls under the Office of Apprenticeship. And in the United States, the states are pretty much divided up as part of which state has a state apprenticeship agency and which state has a representative from the U.S. Department of Labor. And it's all started back in 1937 was with the Fitzgerald Act that was passed. And in 1939, it was passed in North Carolina. And in North Carolina, we have a state apprenticeship agency, which is Apprenticeship NC. In Texas, they have an Office of Apprenticeship Representative, a person that pretty much watches and assists the whole state with a registered apprenticeship. But here in North Carolina, I'm proud to say that North Carolina has really grown with this and has taken the step further with going into your non-traditional occupations. Everybody probably remembers in their studies of learning about the guild system and Benjamin Franklin being an apprentice and so forth. But I'm really proud to say that through the history, North Carolina has really taken this and moved it forward. And for us here in North Carolina, we work directly with companies. We work with them to establish performance-based on-the-job training, and the relationship that it has with the classroom instruction or the formalized training, like we're talking about here today with teachers. And as Olivia stated, during the time of their internship, it's their apprenticeship. It's given them that time frame to really apply what their lessons are learning in the classroom from their classroom activities to actual real life, students, teacher mentorship. So for us, it's really working with the company, both public and private. We have lots of public entities in the state that we work with. But I know it was mentioned earlier about the attrition and all the retirements that are coming up. And it's the same for companies too. So we work with companies to help take their subject matter experts, those that are getting ready to walk out the door on retirement, and develop a competency performance-based training plan and kind of taking some of that knowledge from that and formalizing it before it walks out the door. I think the occupation teacher is very relevant. The Fitzgerald Act is in the process of being updated. And with that, I'm very proud to say just the other day, the occupation of teacher was added to the approved list of occupations by the U.S. Department of Labor, which is a very exciting time being here with you today and talking about this here now, because it's so relevant with the other states that we've heard from and with what is being taken care of, and progressing this in the state of North Carolina. So it's a very exciting time.
It is very exciting to hear that teachers are now recognized as an occupation, and it really does sort of already lay the groundwork nicely for North Carolina to slip in there and actually implement the first program. And so let's keep talking about what it would take to do that. Stephanie, so I'm thinking about some of those components that are required for a registered apprenticeship, whether that was sort of the paid experiences, the direct relationship with businesses and organizations for that mentoring role, and some of the related technical instruction, just thinking about the practicality of implementing that in a school environment or with districts. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of how the program was designed and how it addresses some of those aspects?
Sure. So in a few of across all of the districts where we're working, there's a commitment to have apprentices in place in the schools at least 80% time. So they become employees of the school district. There's a screening process that happens on the ed prep provider side and also on the district side. The districts agree to hire the apprentices, and they're at least 80% time, and that's because the role that's designed for them is an essential role in the school. It's essential for those teaching teams, and so they need to make sure they're going to be present enough of the time. So it's working for a full year, 80% time. The salary for the residents is set by the school districts. So we have some school districts that have elected to go with paraprofessional level salary, and those undergraduate apprentices are making $24,000 a year with benefits for the job that they're playing. We've had other districts that have decided they needed to create more resident slots. There's a dramatic need on the ed prep provider side to place a lot of candidates, and they have a dramatic need to recruit a lot of candidates. And they opted to share a paraprofessional role between two apprentices. So they're both working the 80% time, but sharing that role, and they're making half paraprofessional pay, so more like $12,000 each. And then the districts, some of the districts offer benefits and some do not. So that's really been a district by district decision in the sites that we're working with in Texas. The role as it plays out in the school, there's a gradual release plan that's developed between the district and the ed prep provider to express how more responsibility will be given to the apprentice over the course of the year. But initially, they will not be held responsible for providing release time to a multi-classroom leader, but within a few weeks, they're expected to do that. They have time built into the week to work directly with their multi-classroom leader, planning, getting coaching and feedback cycles. We go for at least a couple of those a week. And playing a variety of instructional roles. So they can be tutoring small groups at the direction of the multi-classroom leader. They can be leading whole group instruction. They can be working on how you manage groups of students, small groups of students in a whole class setting. So they play a variety of roles for the team. They get exposure to that excellent multi-classroom leader as their mentor. They also get exposure to other teachers on the teaching team. So it really is a very rich learning experience for them as they're preparing to become teachers in their first year.
Oh, it sounds really robust, and something that sort of struck me was the little bit of a flexibility based on the need of the district. And Kathryn, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of with the registration process and sort of with an apprenticeship program, how sort of uniform does it have to look, or what are some of the abilities of customizing the program?
Yes, the good thing about apprenticeship is its flexibility. It is flexible to meet the needs of the entity or the employer at hand. You know, what is going to work for either the state as a whole, each region, district, whatever, what's going to work best? Will it be different for the rural areas as opposed to the metropolitan? Is it something that can be more uniform? It's very flexible in that sense. It's the registration process. We have staff because we are an agency, a state apprenticeship agency, and I must add it has been very beneficial for apprenticeship to be housed in the community college system because now we have 58 partners across the state that help us with developing good, robust training programs. So depending on the situation and depending on the area, it's very flexible. We could have the registration of a certain district, which could also work into the advantage of being able to, with our partnerships with community colleges, with DPI, with the local high schools to start developing talent pipelines. So the registration process is really very simple, and it depends upon the needs of the area and on the group as a whole as to what would be the most benefit here. I think Stephanie gives us a very good example of what they have done and how they have approached it. And the good thing about this too is apprenticeship is a living document. I like to tell people that we're working with, it's flexible. Let's try this out. And if we find out after the first 6 months, a year, whatever, it's like, we need to make some adjustments here. If we can just change X, Y, and Z or whatever, I think it would work better. For us, that's a very simple process. We work to make that change. We make the changes necessary to make it work. To make it work not only for the schools themselves that are in need for teachers, but for the teachers themselves. Those that are going through their internship, those who are working hard to try to get their education so that they can be a good teacher. And I do think, having something like this will also help in your recruitment aspects. To show what you are doing as a state to try to make it a benefit to not only the system as a whole, but you're looking at your community, you're looking at your students, you're looking at building the teachers within that community so that you're building the students as well. And we're very focused on equity. I think diversity and inclusion has been a big part of our focus, and we want to make sure that we bring in a lot of diversity within the apprentices that are registered.
Great, thank you. And you started to touch a little bit about some benefits of registering the program, and I want to come back to that in just a moment. But Stephanie, I'd like to talk about with you the benefits of this type of model. What kind of benefits early benefits are you seeing with some of your students and with the educators?
Yeah, the student outcomes from just our first year of implementation with the first two districts we did this with were really exciting. So you could develop a paid apprenticeship in teaching, and you could have apprentices in a classroom with a teacher and not really change anything about the structure of the school. That is an option. It's harder to do it this way, but the outcomes for students have been really dramatic. So one of our first districts, Ector County ISD, the superintendent there was forward-thinking and commissioned a study from Texas Tech University to take a look at the first year of implementation of opportunity culture with the apprenticeship attached to it. And this first year of implementation was the COVID year. So this is happening at the time of the pandemic, at the time of people transitioning to remote learning. We have teacher apprentices having to operate in this structure, and we weren't really sure how this was going to play out. But the Texas Tech researchers found really dramatic learning results for the kids, and they were kind of astounded by it. So it's always nice when you hear researchers say, we don't usually come away from a study with like excitement, but they actually expressed excitement. We captured some of their quotes on our website because we thought it was so great. But they found that in the opportunity culture, within the opportunity culture teams, students exhibited an extra, what was equivalent to an extra 8/10 of a year of learning in reading, an extra 3/10 of a year of learning in math, and for their English language learners, which is a very large population in Ector County ISD, an extra 1.3 years of learning. So that opportunity culture structure with that multi-classroom leader at the helm of a teaching team is powerful for students. And having an apprenticeship feeding that, what was otherwise a paraprofessional role that folks are having a hard time filling now. There's shortages all around. It's fueling their pipeline while it's serving kids well, and it's having some pretty dramatic results for them. It's also been really exciting to see how this strategy is giving the district leaders, they talk about it with a sense of hope, because it's helping them tackle shortages that they face every year. And like Mrs. Cherry was talking about earlier, this is not just a day one issue, right? This does not ever leave you. It's with you all year. So that can be very demoralizing to keep fighting against that. It's helping them feel like they are tackling that instantly because the redesign of the schools is making it less essential to fill every teacher vacancy, because some of this is a restructuring of the teaching roles and the incorporation of the teacher apprentices. It's also helping them retain teachers at a higher rate. So the teacher apprentices come through this year feeling like, I'm ready to take on my own classroom. And so when they're a first-year teacher, a third-year teacher, a fifth-year teacher, they're feeling more ready, but they're also continuing to receive support from a multi-classroom leader. So it's helping instantly, but it's helping long-term also. And so it's great to hear the district leaders talk about it, because they exhibit a sense of hope that I think we need a little bit more of these days, when educators have felt so worn down by the last couple of years.
It has been a rough couple of years for educators. As a researcher, though, I do find events. I come away excited from every one of my research projects, so we should work together more. Kathryn, I want to talk to you a little bit about those benefits that we were just talking about, and it's interesting because I heard Stephanie talking about retention. And so we think about apprenticeship programs, or we're thinking about some of these student teaching experiences, and we're thinking about the improvements in the immediate. But I know registered apprenticeship, one of the benefits and one of the long-time things is the retention. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about the retention benefits.
Right, and thank you. And I think Stephanie brought out a lot of good points about apprenticeship and the benefits too, but retention is one of the highest points that employers all across the state, all across the country actually, are expressing the benefits of apprenticeship. The student teacher in this case, in this situation, is seeing the involvement of those not only from a local level, but from a statewide level too. They see the involvement into their situation and what is happening to them right now. Just as Stephanie said, it's seeing that involvement and that, here we are, we're going to try to remedy this situation. We may not have a magic wand, but we're going to work together to remedy this. And apprenticeship, the high retention is probably one of the key elements that employers tell us. They see that involvement, they see that potential, they see that concern, and where they're working with them to help remedy and make this a good working environment. They have input into that. They're able to take what they're learning from from the education side and applying it right there with a subject matter expert, that teacher that's with them, that help guide them and help implement them. So as Stephanie said it, I think she put it very well, growing. They grow with their apprenticeship. They're growing, they're learning. And also we have found in many aspects with employers is that when you put an apprentice in this type of situation, they have a tendency to not just stop at one level. That education, that learning and growing within an establishment is there, and it continues. They're able to grow their leaders. They're able to grow, those master teachers, if you will, superintendents, or I should say principals, and then possibly superintendents or whatever. But it helps them to grow from within and build that practice and that loyalty from that teacher, because they are involved and they see the involvement of those above them, and they have a tendency to stay. Plus, this in North Carolina is recognized, since we are a state-approving agency, it's recognized not only within the state, but it's recognized within the United States as well. So these teachers are not only working for credentials locally with the universities, they're working toward other credentials as well that's recognized throughout the United States.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction to note, that North Carolina is one of the only state apprenticeship agencies that is recognized nationally with their apprenticeship journeyman certificates. So we have a couple audience questions. How does this apprenticeship model line up with the number of lateral entry programs we have in the state? And does this model have the ability to live in both the traditionally trained setting as well as others? And so I guess, Stephanie, if you might be able to touch on that.
Yeah, the work we've been doing with districts and ed prep providers in Texas has been focused on the ed prep providers' traditional four-year route. And there is a little bit of a dynamic there where there have been a surge in the number of folks coming through lateral entry, and the traditional ed prep providers wanting to create an opportunity that would be great for folks to take the traditional route. So it hasn't included lateral entry in that sense, but it could. So when you think of the design of opportunity culture teams, and for those of you who are joining us who aren't familiar with this, there will be a link that has a little bit of an overview about opportunity culture models, so it's not abstract for you. But in North Carolina, 10% of our districts are using the models in some fashion, so many people are familiar with this. But the structure of the model provides support to a team of teachers, and it's the ethos of coaching for all. So instead of having to triage coaching to teachers who are struggling the most, all teachers would receive coaching by the multi-classroom leader. The apprentice, playing the paraprofessional role, gets coaching as an apprentice. But if you had a lateral entry candidate coming in to do their residency and they were placed on a multi-classroom leaders team, they're also going to get coaching. So if they were in a teacher of record position as a resident, they would still be getting support from a multi-classroom leader by nature of the way the school is now designed to have these small teaching teams. That's not what's been done by the districts in Texas, but it could be done. And some of them are interested in adding that thinking over time, but we've been focused on the traditional undergraduate route with them for the beginning.
Great. And I think we have a licensure panel coming up after this that can also think about, where this fits in the whole licensure pathway, including those non-traditional EPP programs. And Stephanie, we've got another question sort of thinking about the programmatic side of this. Do student teachers that go through apprenticeship program have the requirement to stay within that school or district for a certain amount of time, or once they've become licensed?
That's a great question. All of the districts that we've worked with have wrestled with whether or not to have a requirement like that, knowing that it's very hard to enforce that type of requirement, but many are choosing to make it an understanding that we expect you to stay for 2 or 3 years if we pay for you to go through this apprenticeship. They're not creating any type of enforcement mechanism that would require the teacher to pay that money back or anything like that. But there is a little bit of an expectation that we're investing in you because we want you to become part of our teacher workforce. But we're finding that many of the teacher candidates, after working on a multi-classroom leader team for a year, feel that they do want to stay because they do feel very invested in that school or that district. So we are seeing some pretty strong retention of the candidates at the end of their apprenticeship year.
Great. And are the candidates enrolled in traditional EPP programs and taking online courses, or do they do a blend of both? Or
They
I
do
guess
take
it's both.
courses, yes. So the EPP has redesigned the thinking of the courses so that they will be able to be available for that 80% time. And then in the Texas districts, they're using the US Prep redesign model for the ed prep providers. And they have a site coordinator role that the ed prep provider develops that's embedded in the school district and delivers the coursework to the candidates. So it's part of the way that they've approached that model, having somebody from the ed prep provider embedded in the district to provide that coursework to the candidates. I imagine it was all online though in their first year of implementation.
Hopefully they'll at least be getting back into person soon. So are you aware of any states using graded pay rate for resident teacher apprenticeships if they come into the profession mid-career with significant experience in a non-teaching area?
I don't think I have a specific answer to that question. I do know we've heard from some of our ed prep providers who also run alternative entry pathways in their they run both the traditional and the alt-cert pathway. I've heard some of them say that we've actually got some folks who are in our alt-cert pathway that could be put in a classroom and serve as that teacher of record in their residency year, and they don't feel ready for that, and they would rather serve in the paraprofessional role as the apprentice and get paid at that rate, but feel like they're going to be ready when they take on the classroom. So it's not really, it's like the closest answer I can get to that question, but we've seen some interest from candidates themselves to opt for the apprenticeship year because they feel it will be better on-ramp into teaching than going right into, I have a classroom of my own while I'm in a residency situation.
Yeah, I think it's a great model in thinking about providing some structure or experience where our resident candidates can get some experience in that classroom before they do become the full teacher of record. So, Kathryn, I'm thinking about some of the additional benefits of registering a program that may not typically be associated with sort of just every program. I'm thinking some of the federal benefits that we might be able to tap into, if maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Right. There's several things coming down from the current administration. We have, well, actually, even on state level, the recent legislation, the budget was passed to enhance apprenticeships in rural areas. So that's one area that we're looking at. But the federal government is also releasing several opportunities for apprenticeship to be able to use funds to help grow apprenticeship in the areas per state, and actually have some funding becoming available as early as next year for grants to help pay for the education expenses, to help pay for salary reimbursement, to help pay for equipment and things that are needed. So we're hoping to be able to utilize that funds, even the current grant funds that we have now from this administration, to help pay for education expenses on a community college level. And part of the other benefits that are coming down is, especially in what we currently have available, is our strong partnership with other agencies and to help develop talent pipeline on a local level, as I was referring to earlier in the Grow Your Own, is to also tap into the early childhood development teacher role and into high schools, and to start developing that talent pipeline to help see what talent is out there, and to let students in high school be able to experience the life of a teacher role to see if that's something they want to get into, and if so, how they can enhance those skills and move on up to a community college level where we can pay for their education at the community college level, or even move on up to the university level to help with those expenses. So there are federal funds available now and coming up to help take care of some of these expenses that employers are seeing for apprenticeship to help grow that apprenticeship model.
Great, thank you. And I think that's really an important, interesting detail of really has been an awareness and interest by the U.S. government to grow apprenticeship programs, and there's been a good and kind of concerted effort between the Department of Education and the Department of Labor to connect these workforce programs. And so there is a U.S. Department of Labor resource book that talks about how to tap into those federal resources. We'll make sure that the participants here can have access to. Another audience question, it says, what are some of the barriers for rolling out a paid teacher apprenticeship statewide? And how many apprentices would we want to have statewide if we currently have 100,000 teachers in 2,500 schools? Not sure if either one of you are going to be able to answer that magic number question at this point, but thinking about what some of the barriers might be in rolling out a teacher apprenticeship program?
Some that come to mind for me, it gets to the, when I think about the work that's occurred with our districts and ed prep providers in Texas, a lot of it is the really important communication that occurs between the teacher prep institution and the district. And part of this is that relationship building that was brought up in one of the earlier sessions, to get an understanding of what's possible for you in the coming year, knowing that you have a teacher candidate pipeline. You've got folks who are entering their senior year. That pipeline is pretty set right now. You can do recruitment to build the pipeline in future years. What's possible in this coming year as we're redesigning our schools, and what's possible in the future that we could envision together and push for together. And I think that if you take a statewide approach, it would be very important to ensure that that ed prep provider district conversation is still a part of what's being designed, because that's felt really fruitful and very important, because it's there are some shortages that are pretty much across the board. Everybody needs math and science. There's always going to be a push to have more secondary, but there are a lot of elementary candidates that need placements. There's going to be those dynamics that are kind of similar across locales, but there are going to be some dynamics that are different. And you might have some districts that really want to have a grow your own paraprofessional pipeline. They want to talk with the ed prep provider about how can we make this work, and you just want those conversations to have a space to take through.
Right, and I think you brought up some very good points. And in addition to that, it's a statewide versus local approach is really going to depend on the needs. The good thing about apprenticeship is it is flexible. So you may have a common need that is statewide, as you indicated, but the recruitment efforts may be a little different on a local level. One area that we are tapping into, a lot of people, or a lot of employers, entities, I should say, are utilizing apprenticeship as a recruitment tool. A recruitment tool, as I mentioned earlier, in high schools, at community colleges, at local workforce development boards. But in addition to that, they're also utilizing our military bases that we have here in North Carolina. And interestingly enough, North Carolina and Texas are the only two states that have a registered apprenticeship for the military personnel on base. We at Fort Bragg, they use apprenticeship with their MOS system, and as they gain their skills and as they move up, they have to have their apprenticeship completed. So that's one area that employers all across the state are also utilizing, Fort Bragg, Cherry Point, so forth, to recruit those soldiers who are going to be transitioning out of the service. You already have good work ethic. You already have a lot of education components met there. And a lot of employers are utilizing that as a resource, as a recruitment resource. Because, too, in addition to that, if an employer has a registered apprenticeship program within their establishment, and they have a veteran that enrolls in that program, that veteran is able to draw from their GI Bill benefits while they're in training. So it is a recruitment tool because that's tax-free money that goes directly into their pocket while they're working on their apprenticeship. So as far as challenges, I think the communication, I think Stephanie brought out a very good point and reiterate that. And I think the team here needs to look at it as a whole of the resource. What is something across the board, statewide versus local? Would it be consistent? And here again, it's flexible. Let's say, for example, we do a statewide initiative and come to find out, you know what, we need to change some things and make it more local, or vice versa. That can be done. It can easily be done and implemented, and with the team that we have together and the Apprenticeship NC team could easily or help to assist that. I say easily, but I think we could make it an easy endeavor. Yes.
I just love the connections to all of the panels, and there will be a grow your own discussion later. And it's just interesting that both of these models, both with sort of what's happening in Texas and traditionally with the apprenticeship programs, in really thinking about that investment in the worker. And you know, we have the high school apprenticeship model now in North Carolina that I think makes also an interesting pathway into teaching with potential pre-apprenticeship programs that can start in high school and then continue on as they go into their post-secondary education and into an EPP perhaps. And so I think that's a great opportunity. Seeing a question being typed in here as sort of our last audience question we've got is, what kind of numbers are these opportunities attracting in North Carolina currently? I'm not sure I actually understand the question.
Well, if I can just add to that, this may not be an answer to the question, but as far as apprenticeships in North Carolina, over the last couple of years, we have grown almost, it was like around 82% in the number of apprentices. Now, last year was a unique year in the sense that, you know, our number of apprentices was lower, but the number of employers to register apprenticeship increased. And the issue there was the employers had the incentive, the employers had the interest, but could not find the apprentices to enroll in the program. So we have lots of interest in, as I said earlier, lots of your non-traditional occupations like pharmacy technician and medical assistant, nursing. We have several nursing occupations now. And that is, healthcare industry is definitely one that has jumped leaps and bounds in addition to information technology.
And clarification on the question, in Texas, what kind of numbers are we seeing in terms of this program, and how could those potentially translate to North Carolina?
Okay.
If we did that.
So in Texas, there's been great demand for the full year placements. The ed prep providers, as they transition to this way of programming, they make it an option for their candidates to opt into the full year clinical placement. Since when they started the program, that wasn't a part of the program. There's been a lot of interest among teacher candidates to have a full year placement, especially a paid full year placement, especially if you can be paid $24,000 a year. That's pretty essential for some of our students in the ed prep program. So we have seen some, in terms of like supply and demand. One of our districts, you know, had about 20 spots that they were recruiting for, and they had hundreds of candidates that wanted these spots. So very large demand, and some of these ed prep providers are large ed prep providers that have hundreds of candidates that will flow through the system and need placements in the coming years. So a lot of interest from the teacher candidates themselves.
Great. All right, well, we have 1 minute left between us and lunch, and so with that, I really want to take this opportunity to thank both of our panelists. I think this has been a really interesting discussion around sort of what an apprenticeship model could look like here in North Carolina, and I think if anything, it's just raised some more questions and interest for further conversation. So with that, there will be a question in the chat to get your thoughts on sort of what an apprenticeship program might look like, what features you would want to see in an apprenticeship program here in North Carolina. And we will be taking a 45-minute break for lunch. And then when we return, we're going to have a conversation with Superintendent Truitt about the state vision for teacher recruitment. So I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, and go eat some lunch.